So we're now on Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis, and we learned in the Mishnah, Cholatz v'oso maimar v'nosen geru baal einachar chalitza klum. And what comes out of this din is that maimar and be'ila do not generate a requirement of a get in order to be mato linose, because there already was chalitza. And then the get is not considered a get. But the Gemara asks about this din of get, Bishlema Cholatz v'yosa maimar. I understand that there's a chiddush in our Mishnah in the case where he began with chalitza and then he followed with maimar to tell me that the maimar is not chal. Itzrich salkedait chamina. I could have entertained the idea that even though after chalitza, the kiddushay yavam are not tofes in the yavama, and that's again based on Rabbi Akiva's ein kiddusha tofsim b'chayvei lavin. But nigzar maimer de basar chalitza, atu maimer de kami chalitza. If he had started with maimer before the chalitza, then that maimer would generate a chiv get, and that's the rabbanon. But in order to maintain that, in the case of Maimer de Kame Chalitza, we need to extend the Gzera to the case of Maimer de Basar Chalitza. If he did a Maimer after Chalitza, which clearly the Maimer is not Chal, but if it would be confused with Maimer de Kame Chalitza, then you might undermine the Takonis, the Gzeres Chacham of Maimer de Kame Chalitza. Therefore, it might be even Maimer de Basar Chalitza. We might have a Havamina that we would require again. Mashmalon, the Mishnah, therefore, through formulating this principle of Einachar Chalitza Klum, teaches me that the Maimar is not Machayev get. It doesn't register at all. The Lo Gazrinon, we don't have a Gzera. So that part I understand. That's the Bishlei Cholatz v'yasa Maimar. But now the other din of Cholatz v'nosan get, to teach me that Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, if he followed the Chalitza with a get, and we're saying that the get is not nechshav k'magarij, lamali. What do I need this for? Now, in order to understand the Gemara's question lamali, we should look at Rashi at the very beginning of the daf of Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Cholatz v'yosa maimar ayavam echad v'yavama achas. Oy. So we're talking about a case, the bare bones case of one Yevama and one Yavam. And the man gives chalitza and then a get. Now, she's already chalutzasa, which means that all her relatives, her mother, her sister, her daughter, they're all asura olav mitzad chalitza. So the get doesn't add anything. So why do you have to dramatize this with ein achar chalitza klum? What was the havamina? What would be the opposite of klum? What would the get after chalitza be? I mean, what would it add? Again, she's psul l'kuhuna, for example, because of chalitza, and her krovos are asura olav because of chalitza. So there's no meaning to the get at all. So obviously, the Maisa Gerushin does not register. I mean, what do you have to tell me? Well, because Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, I'm machadish to you that the get subsequently is not meaningful. I mean, how would it be meaningful if there was such a havamina? So again, as we've seen over and over again in this sugya, that sometimes when the Gemara asks one question, the response is, well, what about this question? And that's going to force us to use the symmetry theory about the literary style of the Mishnah, Ulit Ameich. According to your understanding, that the din of get li'achar chalitza is lo litzorech, it doesn't add anything, then why don't you add, according to your argument, another din in the Mishnah that's shalo litzorech? Ema Seifa. Let's look at the Seifa. And what's the case in the Seifa? Baal. And then Asa Maimar, So after the Be'ilah, he does a Maimar, or Baal v'Nasan get. After Be'ilah, he gave a get. And in these two cases, scenarios, we're going to say Einach Arbia Klum, as we saw in Amud Aleph. So the Tana gives me the case of Chalitza, where he started with Chalitza, and Einach Arbia Klum. And what he means to say is after Bia, again, Einach Arbia Klum. Now, let's just think about this. After Bia, she doesn't need Chalitza because she's already an Eishes Ish. So to be matir her, she needs a get, but not Chalitza. The get itself would be sufficient. And if she does a Maimar after Be'ilah, so he says the following: Bishlem a Baal v'Nasan get. Let's say after the Be'ilah, he gave her a get. So you might think Itzrich Salkadaitach Amina Nigzar get the Basar Be'ilah or to get the Kami Be'ilah. If the get had been delivered to her before Be'ilah, then the Rabbanim recognized that get. So here's again, we'll go through the Salkadaitach again. Nigzar get the Basar Be'ilah, right? So he gave her a get after Be'ilah. And we might institute a Gzera that his Nesinas Haget would not be sufficient to be matir her without Chalitza. She still needs Chalitza. Why would she need Chalitza? But let's flip it around. Otu, we might confuse the case of get after Be'ilah with a case of get Makami Be'ilah. Had he given her a get before Be'ilah, then she needs Chalitza. And we might come to the conclusion that she doesn't need Chalitza. We're going to make that mistake that if there was get and then Be'ilah, does she need Chalitza? The Bia itself is a Bila Psula. And this we discussed earlier, that in a case of Ve'ila Psula after a get, she needs Chalitza. Again, there's all of Takanas Chachamim, but she needs Chalitza. It's called Mashmalan to Lo Gazrinon. So that I can understand in the case of Baal V'Nosan Get. That there might have been a Havmi that she requires Chalitza, or to the case of get Basar, just 1 second, of get the Mekame Be'ilah, of a get that came before the Be'ilah. Because the Be'ilah is a Be'ilah Psul and she needs Chalitza. But Mashmalan do Lo Gazrina. Oh, Avol, here's the Gemara's Kasha. Baal the Asam Maimar, he started with Be'ilah, then he gave her a Maimar. And you're telling me, Ein Achar Be'ilah Klum, Lomali. What's the Chiddush in that thing? I mean, she's Ishto L'chol Davar, right? So what does a Maimar add after she's already his wife? What new Isa would be chal as a result of the Maimer? And you telling me what she needs to get to the Maimer? She needs to get because of the Be'ila. Ella, you're going to have to assume Aidi the Tana Asa Maimar, Chalatz V'Asa Maimar, where the Chiddush was that they didn't make a Gzeira on this Maimar, which was after Chalitza, to require a get. No, Einacher Chalitza Klum. So once he needs the Chiddush of Chalatz V'Asa Maimar, Tananami, Baal V'Asa Maimar. So that's a symmetry. That Be'ila completely removes the Zikas Yibum, like Chalitza, and the Maimer afterwards is meaningless. Oh, the Aidi the boil of Misni Baal the Nosan Get. Now we've already justified the case of Baal the Asa Maimer Baal the Nosan Get is Tananami. He already maintains that symmetry to say Chalatz v'Nosan Get. So we have Baal v'Nosan Get, and now we have Chalatz v'Nosan Get. Now the Mishnah says Bizman shehi b'tchila ein achrei klum, and we have b'emtza u'basof yesh achrei klum. That's going to Tanakama, and then the Mishnah records the Shita, the dissenting view of Rabbi Nachman, Nechemia Omer, achas be'ila, v'achas chalitza, bein b'tchila, bein b'emtza, bein b'sof, ein achrei klum. So whereas the Tanakama holds that b'emtza b'sof yesh achrei klum, Rabbi Nechemia holds even in the case of b'emtza or b'sof ein achrei klum. So this Mishnah brings the machlok between Rabbi Nechemia and Chachamim in bia b'emtza, bia b'sof. But Chalitza, the Mishnah doesn't accept any distinction whatsoever, whether it was done b'tchila, whether it's done b'emtza, whether it does b'sof. It's only with regard to bia, not with regard to Chalitza. So the Gemara says, the Loki Haitana, the Tanya Abba Yossi Ben Yochanan Yitzchayim Mishum Rabbi Meir, Achas Be'ila v'Achas Chalitza. The same laws apply to both Be'ila and Chalitza. That means B'tchila, if the Be'ila or the Chalitza was first, there was nothing before it, no Maimer, no Get, is then Ein Achrei Klum. But answer b'sof yesh achrei klum. So again, if there was be'ila or chalitza b'tchila, then the get or the maimer afterwards are not tofes at all. They're not meaningful. They're not effective. However, if either be'ila or chalitza or ba'emtza, if they were sandwiched in between get and maimar, or basof, in other words, after he gave a get, he did maimar, and then he had either be'ila or chalitza, yesh achrei klum, that the maimar or the get, in the case of basof, which means after either chalitza or be'ila, is then there's yesh maimar v'get. So there's yesh maimar v'get after be'ila, and there's yesh maimar v'get after chalitza. Again, if the be'ila or chalitza were sandwiching in if the maimar or the get was sandwiching in the be'ila or the chalitza, or alternatively, if the maimar or the get came before be'ila or chalitza. So the Gemara now clarifies that there are actually three sheets. There's a three-way machlokas b'dava, sholosh machlokos b'dava. The Tanakama of Mishnah Savar, he wants to be mechalek and differentiate between be'ila and chalitza. With regard to be'ila, Then if it was be'emtza b'sof, then we're going to say yesh achar be'ila. Why? The ikal of migzar, because of a chash that people will say that just like bila after mimer is kona, so too be'ila after be'ila is kona. And just like be'ila after get is kona, so too be'ila after chalitza is kona. Is gazrin on, we have to make a gzeres chacham and nutakana that the bia should not be kona and that she should require chalitza together with the get. And they were saking that the get and the mimer that comes afterwards should be affected. However, chalitza, when it was implemented between the get and the mimer, or afterwards, lekala migza, there's no makom for a chashash that if they're going to be mater holy maseh after chalitza, that's going to create a michshol. Is lekala migzar is lo gazrina. There was never a gzera that the chalitza should not be mater l'gamer, and that the get and the mimer that comes afterwards would be affected. That's the shita of Tanakh. The Chemya Sovar, he holds that even after bia, between get and mimer, or after get and mimer, the get and the mimer not kona. Why? Sovar bia nami lekala migzar. Even in bia, we don't have a gzera, just like in chalitza, we don't have a gzera. And Rav Nechemia now responds to the argument, the logic of the Tanakh. Udika you say that there's a gzera of ligdar bia achar haget mishum bia achar chalitza. We're going to make a gzera according to your logic that bia achar get, she's not niknes liyavam legamre, and therefore you need chalitza together with the get. And furthermore, the get and the mimer afterwards would be effective. Bishum, what's the chash of bia achar chalitza? That they'll make the equation to get in chalitza. Says Rabbi Nechemia, there's no chash. Came on the chalitza doraisa. The Torah mentions chalitza as a matir. Get is not written as a matir in this context of Yibum. Is made a yadi. Everyone knows that we should differentiate between the two of them. And we would understand that there's no room for gzera bia achar get to bia achar chalitza. And furthermore, udika amrit ligzar bia achar maima. That's the case we did a maima in the tzara, and we should make a gzera that the kinyan to the yavam is not a complete kinyan, that she should now need chalitza together with the get, and that get umayim achreya should be meaningful and effective. Mishum bia achar bia. He says, Kevon, there's no chash because bia is doraisa and amei the yadi. Everyone knows that the bia is strong enough for a kinyan, and much more so than maimar. So they're not going to derive from Be'ila, which is Kona after Maimar, that it should be Kona after Be'ila. That's the sheet of Rabbi Nechemia. The third sheet is that of the Abba Yossi ben Chanan Savarlok Rabbanon the Gazri B'Bia. The Gazar, he also has Xera B'Chalitza, Mishum Bia. Saba Yossi has the gzera of bia. In other words, if the bia was after maimer or after get, we're going to generate an isur and we make a takana that the get in the maimer will chal after the bia. And not only did Abba Yossi accept the Rabbana with regard to the gzera of bia achamaymer or bia achar get, he also extended it to chalitza. Because of the chalitza, if it was done after the maimer or after the get, that the get and the maimer are affected. Mishum, the gzera is because of gazwatu bia, meaning bia after get and maimer. So that Abba Yossi holds that if they won't make a takana such that get and maimar after chalitza is a chalitza psula, meaning that the get and the maimar should be effective after chalitza psula, then we have to be afraid that maybe they'll derive from chalitza psula she'ein achrei maimar v'get is gam so to achrei bia psula Einom Chalin, meaning Maimer and Get are not viable. And then the whole takana will become what? So Hadron Alecha Perek Rabbi Gamliel. And now in Mitzvah Hashem will begin the sixth Perek, Haba al Yevimot. So the Torah says, Yevama Yavo Leho L'Kachalo L'Shavi Yivma, and we derive from this that Min Torah, a Yevama is only Niknes B'Bia. And in our Mishnah, at the beginning here of the sixth Perek, we're going to try to clarify what exactly constitutes or is chashiv like a bia, the kinyan Yevama. Abal Yevimto, Bein B'Shogeg, maybe he thought it was his wife, and he had a relationship with her, or she thought she was another woman, and he didn't have Kavana L'Shem Yib. Bein B'Mezid, well, let's say he knew for sure he was Bal Yevimto, but he wanted to have him Znus. He wasn't interested in Yibum, not in the mitzvah of Yibum. Bein Ba'onis, let's say he forced her to have beer with him. Or let's say he had kavana to have a relationship with his wife, and then she forced him to have a relationship with her. Bein B'Ratzon, or if he had a will and a desire to have a relationship with her, afilu shehu shogeg v'hi mesida. Neither of them had kavana mitzvah, or his kavana was shogeg, thought he was his wife, or another woman, he didn't have kavana l'yibu v'hi mesida. She knew that he was the brother of her husband. She didn't have kavana l'shem yibum, but rather l'shem znus. Or who mezid, or he had kavana l'shem znus v'hi shogeges. Who anus v'hi lo anusa, he anusa v'hu lo anus. And in all these cases that are listed, enumerated above, and it could be Shneim Shogim, Shneim Mesir, Shneim Anusim, it's always considered a Bia, and he's Kones Yevam. And how much of a Bia is a Bia? What constitutes a Maisa Bia? Echad Ama'ara. Notice he didn't complete his Bia, there was only a little bit of a penetration. Echad Gomer, or he completed his Bia. Kon. He was Kones Yevam. And if he wants to divorce her, he'll have to give her a get. He inherits his late brother. V'lochilek, the Torah doesn't make any distinction between bia and bia, whether it is a bia kedarka, bia shalom kedarka, whether it's ha'ora, whether it's gemar bia. In any case, he's kohen. V'chein. Haba al achas mikol arayis shebat Torah. The man has a relationship with an erva, and she becomes a zona, and she's asur lekahuna. Oh, or let's say a Kohen has one of these lower level beers of psulos with a woman that he's not allowed to marry, kigon almona lekohen gadol or grusha v'chalutz lekohen hedjot. So let's say a Kohen gadol has a relationship with an almona, and that makes her into a zona, or a grusha, and the Kohen was baal grusha or chalutza. So again, in the case of a Kohen who has a relation with a grusha and chalutza, I mean, she's anyway psula lekahuna, but if she's a bas Kohen, then she becomes psula with this bia to eating truma v'beis avia. She's a chalol. And again, in these bios geruos, they're considered like bia linya mamzerus nesina Yisrael. So if a mamzeres or a nesina who are prohibited from Yisrael, and the Yisrael had a relationship with Ha'ara, that bia is considered bia, and he gets malchus. Also, bas Yisrael and mamzer and nosin. So if a mamzer and nosin has a relationship with a bas Yisrael, in one of those bios gruos, it's considered a bia. She becomes psula for kahuna. And that's true for all the arayis, all the psulos, all the chayiv lav, and psola. Each one becomes psula, like we said earlier. V'lo chilek ben bia lebia. It doesn't matter whether it's a bia kedaka, bia shalom kedaka, whether it's ha'ara, whether it was gemar bia. She always becomes psula lekuhuna. The Gemara says now that we learned in our Mishnah that Abba al Yevimto be Mishogeg be Memezid, Hu Chogeg vehi Mezida, etc., etc. The Gemara asks, my afilu, what does it mean even if he's a Shogeg and she's a Mezida? What chiddush is the Mishnah adding? You already mentioned that there's no chiluk in regard to the kinyan of a yavam, and he's kona, whether it's b'bias shogeg or b'bias mezid. So in all cases, he's kona. But let me just. So again, the Gemara starts with this Maya Filu, and I think we ran out of time, so we'll pick this up in Mitzvah Shem in the next year. We'll start with the Gemara here on the bottom of Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Okay then? All right, thank you very much.